So it's a great pleasure to introduce, first of all, Professor Peter Lineham, Professor of History at Massey University. I've known him for a long time and known about him for a long time because my brother was a historian, so the family was always full of history. And of course, I don't need to introduce Peter Lineham because whenever there's an issue about religion, we see Peter on the television as a talking head, giving his expertise on the issue. But you're much more than that, Peter. You're a real person, and we hope to engage with you personally today. So thank you for coming and sharing with us this urgent issue. Why is no religion on the rise? Thank you, Peter.
Well, on the rise, it certainly is. If you take the orange figures in the graph, you will see that in New Zealand society, on the census data, the option of ticking none, well, this year well, I don't know quite how we did it, how you answer the census electronically, coming up with none as the answer, has dramatically increased really from the 1980s. And it's fairly obvious that it's going to sit in around the 40% range or greater in the 2018 figures when they come out, and that is pretty clear because if you look at the age structure of the groups that have reported up to the previous census, it's extremely clear that the younger you are, the more likely you are to be a person of no religion. I've added the other figures which you can debate with me the appropriateness of putting them on top, because in a hazy sort of way, those who object to state their religion or those who don't answer that question do suggest that there might be a wider number of people who don't connect with religion. These are the historic locations in before the 1970s where quite a large amount of non-religion probably resided, although there are other reasons why people might object to state their religion or not answer the question. It is a legal right. This is the only question in the census you don't have to answer. Now, what I want to ponder with you is why this particular answer has grown so dramatically in recent years. Now, I mean, part of this is simply a quirk of the modern census, that from 1981 there was a tick box where you could tick none. So it made it much simpler to choose to opt out of selecting a denomination which previously it might have been suggested that you were kind of expected to have a denominational option. But it's very intriguing because there's really quite a family of religious answers that existed before the none option and which were much more varied than this bland and vastly pervasive notion of none that's a feature of our society. And it's quite an interesting thought why multiple answers prior to the 1980s, though in smaller numbers, have been reduced to this one general answer since then. So that you've got very distinct groups using each of those options at different phases, and I've another lecture in which I go into the ways in which, very early on in New Zealand history, non-denominational was a way of rejecting the requirement to state your denomination. What exactly does non-denominational mean? My brethren forebears might well have ticked non-denominational, but of course so would people who rejected all of the denominations because they rejected the faith that underlay it. Uncertain had an age of popularity at one point. He was uncertain about many things. To carry to the census seems an interesting option. In particular, there have been phases when free thought and rationalism have in different phases been very popular answers. Agnosticism and atheism have lurked in the census data because in the entire period that our census has been going, the word atheist has been a known option. And I think it's very interesting that what in effect has happened today is that the standard answer is none, from which one deviates with a religious option if one wants. In effect, none is the Anglicanism of the 19th century. I mean by this that none is a kind of fuzzy term, eclectic term, into which virtually anything can be emptied, and often is. So my thesis is quite simply that no religion actually has a different meaning in our contemporary society than what it had in past generations, and that we need to interrogate those who respond that they've got no religion, to ponder what they in fact mean by that statement. And I want to try to classify the types of answers. Now I have to say at this point that try as I have to get some answers out of the census, it's not actually as helpful as one might expect. Mind you, if I had, say, my colleague Barry McDonald's sophistication with census data, I'm going to probably have to call on him shortly, because I ran into a big problem yesterday when I tried to solve it. I'll explain this in a moment. You can take a map like this of Auckland, which was the Herald, in an interesting article, put forward the proposal, and I have to admit that I was extensively interviewed as part of this and didn't spot the flaw in the logic until after. They saw this graph and they deduced on the basis of this graph that effectively the wealthier you were, the more likely you were to have no religion. And it's the immediate impression that you might gain by looking at the material. South Auckland, the areas of poverty in South Auckland reflect and seem to have very, very low proportions of no religion, below 20%. The above 70% that doesn't perhaps necessarily feed the argument, because I'm not sure that I would think the west of Auckland and the beaches area was necessarily the richest area of Auckland. But certainly, if you go to the concentrations of Remuera and the like, the no religion sections are fairly high. The trouble is that there's too many variables operating in this for actually this to be a sensible answer. The first thing it is very easy to pick out is that there's a major ethnic factor involved in the patterns of no religion. No religion is distinctively a European phenomenon. Is a separate phenomenon which is a Chinese or communist country phenomenon. So those are the two categories of ethnicity where no religion flourishes, in quite different ways, I might say. So the movement of Chinese in New Zealand is from no religion towards religion, whereas the movement of Europeans is from religion towards no religion. So if we eliminate the ethnicity factor, or the migration status of people, the second factor that very clearly gets picked up, which I deal with more in a separate screen, is an age factor. So it's very clear that the younger you are, the more likely you are to have no religion. And while this may seem slightly ridiculous, the simple fact is that's true even down to the people aged 1 to 5. Because parents who once would have imputed their religion to their children now frequently impute no religion, even if they themselves have a religion. They consider that children ought not to have a religion foisted upon them. They should choose to be religious. Now, a third factor that's a curious aspect is the gender aspect. Historically, males have always had a much higher level of no religion than religion. Now, it's not actually true, however, for the younger age groups today. In fact, in the 20 to 24 and the 25 to 29 age bands, there are more females than males that are no religious in New Zealand. And that is the first time that's ever occurred that I've ever seen in Western societies. So I tried then to take a specific group. So I took the Europeans and tried to match them against the deprivation index prepared by Massey University to indicate the poorer parts of New Zealand, and then by taking Europeans, and I can see no logical link at all. And so that suggests to me that education or wealth or like is not immediately a factor in explaining the prevalence of no religion. It's important for us to think about. Now, if you take this work by one of David Boas's students in England, where this student took the results and paid for the results to go back to those born in New Zealand, and then matched cohorts of people right through. And she tracked the cohorts through, going right back to 1912. And you can do that simply because our census is from 1981. They're held electronically, so you can isolate different groups. And what you can see from these figures is that there's clearly a generational pattern happening. So if you take, and I think the simplest is if I go across to the graph and point to you, those born in 1912, you'll notice, have the lowest of no religion. But notice that by 1996, when they're all too old to really to be any significant numbers of the electoral census, the proportion of no religion has grown very slightly, though it sits at way at about 4%. Then take the generation from 1912 to 1921, and you'll see that it's a little bit higher, and it just very slightly grows. So that she's following in every census that particular cohort who report themselves as having been born in that period, or they give their age as a certain amount, and she just follows that through in each census. Then you can see that the next group is those 1922 to 31. Again, they're a little bit higher, and very, very slightly grow. And then if you take then the next generation, 1932 to 41, again a little bit higher, and very slight growth in the censuses through to 2006. Now, what's very interesting is the enormous jump of those born in the generation 1942 to 51. There's a big, big gap between them, maybe 4%. But again, you see the same essential pattern. And then those born, I'm presuming I'm going to cover everybody in the course of this. Then we come to the brown, that's 1952 to 61. And you notice here that there's a significant jump, more than in other places, between 1991 to 96, and again another jump, 2001 to 2006. And if I haven't bought the data that would enable me to complete this graph, but it is a wee bit tricky to do so because it's a longer period between the 2006 and the delayed 2013 census, which would be difficult for me to produce exactly comparable figures. But you can see a growth. Now look at the people born 1962 to 71. And notice how rapidly that grows, because what's happened is, if they're born between 1962 and 71, they're moving into their 20s, or their late 20s, and there's a very large growth as they mature and become independent adults. And then if you take the ones born 1972 to 81, there's an even larger growth. Now, if you look at the overall pattern that's happening there, there's some generalizations we can make. Of course, there will be movement both ways. People who move from no faith to faith, and people who move from faith to no faith. And the census can't contain those specific details. But what you can see as a general statement is that every new decadal group of people has started at a slightly higher level. And in every census, a slightly higher proportion of those born in New Zealand. So it's not people coming in from outside, it's the same group. Slightly higher proportion have no religion. And that the later the period becomes, the dramatically higher that level is, and the higher the proportion of shift towards no religion. Now, I think those are significant. In other words, non-religion has a high retention rate and a high conversion, or shall we say, deconversion rate that's occurring. So that it's now become extremely mainstream in our society, and anybody who talks to their students on the subject at university will certainly know that that's the case. It's very interesting listening to those, to them talk about that. The bell should be given to somebody who's going to keep watching. Now, if we compare the group of people, the intriguing thing is that within the no-religion group, atheists form only a section of those. There are different estimates of what section they were. For example, before the census had tick boxes, the proportion of atheists in the society was rising. It had first become a significant proportion in the 1930s, and that makes a great deal of sense when you consider the events of the 1930s and the growth of the rationalist society at that stage and its enormous public impact as it demanded, it did its great campaign for the freedom to do what you wanted to on Sunday, in the face of the restrictions which the churches maintained, that the trains shouldn't run on Sunday and that the library shouldn't be open on Sunday, etc. And the Rationalist Society ran their Free Sunday campaign. And then in the 1960s, there's a very significant growth until it reaches at its peak in the 1980s, in the 81 that must surely be, 0.7% of the population, just under 1 in 120 was an atheist at that point. But when then the tick boxes existed, you still, of course, could call yourself an atheist as you chose. You simply, rather than doing the tick box none, and that was true of many other denominations as well, if you would in one of the 6 options that were provided, then you wrote in what you were. And so there was a small group who wrote atheist in the tick box, but it is very curious that that number went down in the second census of the tick boxes, and it eventually reduced to really quite tiny numbers of people. There are other estimates of the number of atheists, however, and the Values Survey and the ISSP survey, the International Social Science Survey, have given us estimates because they've taken a very carefully shaped sample of the population and asked them what proportion and asked a question which has clarified if the person simply has no religion or if they believe that God did not exist, believe that there is no God. And so the recent Oxford Handbook on Atheism has produced a very broad range of comparable figures of atheists in many societies using this data, and it's distinguished between what it calls positive atheism and agnosticism. And generating from those figures, they've suggested that, in fact, there are 404,964 positive atheists. Astonishing what you can do with statistics, isn't it? And 461,000 agnostics. So that's approximately, they're estimating approximately half of the 1,635,000 non-religionists are in fact either soft atheists or hard atheists, according to their terminology. Now that's quite striking figures, though whether the basis of the generalisations is altogether correct, you might debate. So, why are these figures on the rise? Because it needs to be noted that New Zealand is very high on the range of people with levels of no religion, although on the atheism figure, it sits rather lower down. For its atheism figure, it sits at about, I think it's 20th or something like that, in the range of Western societies. Of course, the highest society of atheism is Communist China, as you would expect. Now, it's clear that there's both a long-term and a short-term answer. It's very clear that there's a long-term answer in the impact of the Enlightenment. It's also very clear that other factors explain the rise of no religion. In general, atheism is pretty closely linked to religion in its incidence. No religion, in part in New Zealand, means I'm just not interested in religion. And you'd have to say that that's, I think, a very significant proportion of those who are non-religious in our society. And it's very difficult because you have to really kind of work out which is which. And the blurring of the categories in none being such an open category is a real problem. Certainly, I think you can see and interpret people's objection to religious organisations and structures. I don't adhere to any one of these options. None means I opt out. That's the first thing I think we can say about it. The grand theory so popular among sociologists of secularisation argues that in the context of the contemporary world, there's relatively little place for religion, and so religion just gets sidelined and is of no relevance or interest. It doesn't have explanatory force in our society. It's clear, though, that there might be other factors that might offer a strong explanation. For a start, if you look at the figures in Western societies, it would be fair to say that it's a decline in Christianity, not a decline in religion in general. Though we should be cautious about this, for I've watched the patterns of those who describe themselves as Buddhist in our society. And there's a lot to think that Buddhism ought to flourish in our society because the tailor-made forms of Western Buddhism seem very attractive for communities where people are looking for self-fulfillment and self-identity, not with reference to an outside deity. And yet those figures, the growth of Buddhism, if you look at it ethnically, there's very, very little evidence of a significant growth of Buddhism among people, at least ticking it as their religion. It's also intriguing, you see, that at the same time as there's been a growth of no religion, there has been a very large growth in the Christian not otherwise defined category. So these are people who tick the Christian box when you had to tick it in the Christian option in two phases. I don't know how it would work in the current census with the electronic version. And so the flourishing of the Christian option, but people declining to state their denomination. And Jeff Troughton has done some very intriguing work using the values survey material and has shown that the Christian not otherwise defined, when it's looked at by people who say that, yeah, I'm Christian, but I'm not anything else, marks out a group of people who've got quite definite religious views, but absolutely no adherence to any specific denomination. So it's exactly the same phenomenon, an anti-organisational, anti-reduction of views to somebody else's set of views. I know what I believe. I know what I think. You're not going to tell me what combinations I'm allowed to choose. And so the two phenomena may go hand in hand. But really what I think we can see is that it's important to take all the options of people who say none and understand that there may be a whole lot of different streams of no-religionists operating in the community. So it's clear that, to me, that the ancient tradition of the autodidact atheist still exists. The person who rejects authority, is very strongly inclined to the left, is a socialist who believes that if you are a socialist or a Marxist, then there is no room for a divinity. The divinity is the threat to that. And the other extreme is the educated person who thinks that religion is just a crutch that people use for a certain degree, and they're just not interested in the subject. There's an increasing group of people whose religiosity is earth-focused rather than divine-focused, and that's where they gain significance. So, it's also a case that Western people little understand the ways in which Eastern religions are constructed, in which, say, if you're a Buddhist, you might well be an atheist. You don't have to believe in God to be a Buddhist. And in fact, some would argue that pure Buddhism is about the godless in yourself, rather than any sense of an external deity, that's completely inconsistent. So a whole series of different factors come into play. And I think one of the smartest remarks that's been made about this subject is the notion that of fuzzy none as a useful category. That for a lot of people who would have once been fuzzily religious, certainly not involved, committed, or involved, they're now fuzzily non-religious. Push them hard and they won't exactly know which answer to give things. They're just suspicious of any kind of external authority or organisational connection. I've got a lot more on that page, but I can't read the notes because they're too small. So, now, if you take the emergence of the new atheist phenomenon, I mean, it's, I think, important to understand that new atheism and its development is strongly related to the 9/11 events and the fear of Islam. In the way it emerged, the two enemies were Christian fundamentalism and Islam, seen very specifically as leading to terrorism. And so the new atheism is a particular form of no religion which has had a very interesting appeal in recent years, because it enables people to express an opinion about a series of things that they don't like. It is, of course, a publishing phenomenon as much as anything. Books could sell on the issue. And so a set of books that really have virtually nothing in common with each other, the Dawkins books and the Hitchens books, I mean, really are so strikingly different in their flavour and character that one might wonder why they're put together, and the answer is probably just the love of publicity, the love of outraging the popular listeners that made it hugely attractive. So the new atheists treating religion deliberately and outrageously, and they enjoyed outraging, as a dispositional or personality defect. had a huge appeal. One might compare in New Zealand the enormous popularity of the Skeptics Society. Now, the Skeptics Society seemed to have had an agreement with the rationalists that they would not deal with the religious issue. And yet there's a fairly significant overlap of personnel between the Skeptics Society and the rationalist organisation. And the Skeptics Society, with the love of showing how the sort of popular trickster types of stuff that people choose to believe is simply silly. And remember that skeptics' attitude flourished in the 90s, where really many people squirmed uncomfortably as their sort of tea leaves approach to life was revealed as stupid. The behaviour of new atheists was actually intrinsic to the new atheists. After all, the ideas were not new at all. There is nothing new about the new atheists. That's clear enough. Even the offensive propaganda of the new atheists isn't altogether new. You could easily cite working class protests against religion, the Chartists storming their way out of churches in the 1830s and 40s in Britain would be an example of this. That the ferocity of tone actually made their case. They felt a beleaguered minority with an ability to get the attention of the public for what they were saying. And you have to say that Dawkins continues to do it very effectively. Underneath the surface, it's not exactly as it seems, however. For example, my friend Bill Cook, who wrote the history of the rationalists in New Zealand, worked for a period for one of the atheist organisations in the States. And when he came back, we had an interesting conversation, and Bill would have to speak for himself on this. But what he reported to me is that there are rival atheist organisations in the States with different funders and different pushers who hate each other with considerable enthusiasm. So the very different styles of Madeleine O'Hare, for example, and some rather more academically focused organisations come across in different ways. If you look at the attempts to put legal pressure on our society, and so, for example, in New Zealand today, back in 2006, there was the attempt to put the slogans that had been on the London buses, on the New Zealand buses, until New Zealand Bus declared that it was having none of it. That was what they wanted to put on the side of the buses. Of course, they got it on posters, but NZ Bus wouldn't have them on their buses. What I think was going on, actually, they made as much propaganda out of not getting them on the buses as and it was a good deal cheaper to do it that way. If you look at the campaign of the society trying to exclude religion from schools, again, there's a real and deliberate attempt to be provocative in order to make a point and to get attention. And the rationalists, according to their website, have just complained to the United Nations about the way in which religion is voiced to other people on schools, and are hoping that they've got a case that, though it wouldn't flow in New Zealand law, might well flow under United Nations regulations. So the deliberate provocative tone is part of the essence of what's going on, and it's a feature of our own contemporary society when people have ceased to feel an adherence to large and approaches of political philosophy. Where are the genuine socialists? Where are the genuine capitalists today? That instead we go for identity politics, where kind of slogans function with an appeal and people shape themselves around slogans. We shouldn't be treating religion with kid gloves or avoid offending moderate Christians merely because we need their support for various science education battles, such as the Phyto Revolution being taught in schools. That is a statement by one of the new atheists who argues that, well, of course, we might argue that we've got a lot of common cause with Christians with a more liberal disposition, but that's not the point. We want to create a furore because we want to use the opportunity of this campaign to make a general point. So that, in fact, although the cause may work, in fact, against the specific issue that of the teaching of evolution in schools or whatever, in fact, getting public exposure is critical. In fact, as shrewd observers have always observed, new atheists and fundamentalists are, in effect, the same personality type, the same kind of campaign, exact opposites of each other, who each behave as though they are persecuted minorities, precisely needing the opposition of the other in order to flourish. Well, a new book has just come out by John Gray, which wasn't available last week, but was available yesterday for me to download on my Kindle. John Gray's 7 Types of Atheism. This is a bit disappointing from my point of view, because what I wanted was a study of, if we were going to classify atheists into 7 types, I wanted to see them sociologically shaped or historically defined. But certainly Gray, in his witty language, has distinguished between various types of non-believing. And in this study, what he shows is that we must never lump an atheist as one sort of disbelieving. And he sharply contrasts the rationalist tradition from the educated tradition, from the mystic atheist tradition where he places himself. And he has a very interesting section on the scientific atheists, which I'll attempt to summarize in this process. And the tendency we have to assume, if we are Christians, that all atheists hate Christians, is taking the category of one group of atheists and assuming that they're like all others. And I think a lot of cross conversations between atheists and Christians misfire because atheists may like to assume that all Christians are like Jerry Falwell. And we may tend to assume that all atheists are of the Dawkins variety, who likes to pick a fight whether or not he needs to pick it. In Gray's study, he looks at this issue of whether science and atheism are necessary bedfellows. It's often assumed and taken for granted that there is some kind of historical connection between atheism and the growth of modern science. Gray shows that this is by no means the case, that in fact the traditions of atheism go very firmly back into the classical period, and that in the classical period they are not associated with science at all. That it's largely a late 19th century fiction, much fueled by the books by Draper and White about the war between science and religion, in which mythical conversations by Bishop Wilberforce didn't say all the things he was supposed to have said, became part of the folklore of the battle between religion and science. Bear in mind that at its heart, science is not a type of belief at all. It's a mode of investigation. And it does not and cannot generate ethical values. That's not the nature of science. And so the notion that the two are automatically attracted to each other is wrong. And yet it is the case from the statistics of Pew Foundation research done in 2009, and then the subsequent piece of research which looked globally, that scientists are much more likely to disbelieve in God than the general population. And so we need to wonder why that is the case. And I think the patterns in that have shifted in the past 20 years. Certainly the teleological view of evolution makes this popular, and the various versions of this particular icon, very common in a range of atheist publications, that a fully developed human will dispense with God as not needing him. Because the paradox of that is that the essence of Darwinian evolution was the blindness of what happened, therefore making it next to essentially you can't be teleological if you're going to talk evolution. Because if evolution is heading in a certain direction, then there would have to be something guiding that direction. If evolution just by chance heads towards that, then you can't work out what the next stage, especially when it's mental or intellectual, will take. Thus, social Darwinism and progressive values do not automatically follow suit. So, the ethical tendency within science is just not there. And if we take the ethical tendency within our modern, more dominated by non-religion, the recent discussion about should we suppress old-fashioned views on homosexuality reflects, I think, a tendency in our modern world towards greater intolerance in our current world. It's a very intriguing thing that the most striking ethical tendency in Western society is towards identifying views that you firmly believe and that therefore others ought to be suppressed. Now, I haven't got time to deal with the spirituality of no religion, but it's intriguing to me that indeed many of my atheist friends and my no-religionist friends are in fact deeply spiritual, and we'd be very mistaken if we fail to respect and understand that kind of atheism. An intriguing thesis written by a student from the University of Canterbury did an intriguing study of people who were of no religion. She took a sample of 42 of them, and she interviewed them and found that one of the most widespread features of no-religionists in her small sample, but a very interesting sample, was a search for some kind of alternative spirituality that would be meaningful or coherent to them. And the attraction to Māori values is very striking in one group of atheists, while another group firmly and utterly rejects that appeal to religious language. Well, I'm nearly there. Has religion then a future in this contemporary world? It's very clear that the struggles of religion are largely linked to that movement from public space into private space. And much of our religious structure assumes a very public place in society, which religions clearly are not going to occupy in the future. Moreover, there's a degree of global religious competition in which it's apparent that there's going to be much more choosing in a whole range of options that people formerly wouldn't have taken. I wonder in our own society whether, I think there's no risk to religion in this context, but there certainly is going to be an equalising of religious patterns globally as our populations become more mixed, as our communities become more diverse, as knowledge increases right across the range. Clear, any options are going to have to be established. So I ask, finally, what shape then should a Christian apologetic take in this context? Well, firstly, it needs to listen carefully to the objections that people have to religion. A large proportion of Christian apologetics assumes that there's simply a single position of atheism that's one form of coherence. And that's not fair and not true, and it makes people very annoyed. We need to be well aware that the Christian community is full of crazy people, that the extent of creationism has grown in this society in the past 25 years. Roughly 20%, according to the only poll I've ever seen on the subject, 20% of New Zealanders think that creationism is true and should be taught in schools. No wonder there is a degree of anger in our society that these sorts of views are so prevalent. Faith needs to be much better explained as not a dogmatism, but as a faith that needs to sit alongside reason and needs to allow science to speak as well. The challenge of this conference is to make that kind of language have some kind of resonance in our wider society.